We are here at thiekfinwealth channel, and last time we are discussing and watching about financing, types of financing and permanent sources of funds, equity, debt, and everything about basic accounting. So this time we are going to study and watch and learn liquidity ratio and analysis. So let's advance. I wish and hope that everything we have gone through everything is clear enough and there's no doubt. If there is a doubt, then you can give me a feedback and comments. Along with that, my WhatsApp number and mail ID is there, so you don't need to feel hesitate in that. So at this time we are going to watch and learn and study liquidity ratio. I'm gonna using digital pen, so which make it for you all comfortable. The first one is liquidity ratio. What does actual what it actually liquidity ratio is that? What actually is liquidity ratio? Liquidity ratio is what does implies. It is a must for calculating the net worth and compound annual growth and net asset value and expense ratio, current ratio, and to calculate those things we need to be very efficient in liquidity ratio analysis along with that. So we move on to that. Okay. At first we got the equity ratio, and under the heading of that equity, liabilities, and in the other side we have assets, and under this short-term liabilities and short-term assets. So I might be using short-term one while discussing the fact that, so you have to understand that in liquidity ratio means ability of the business to meet its short-term expense. To meet short-term expense. To meet short-term expense. Okay. To meet short-term expense. And obligations. Obligation means a promise or reassure that you have to pay some time in the future for which you possess, for which you bought. Okay. In liquidity ratio, we are trying to understand whether a business is having to meet any pressure to meet its obligation. To meet its obligations. To meet its obligations. That means you have promised to pay something in the future to acquire assets. So the fact is that the factual is that you promise should level up or meet up with the obligation, the promise you already assured. Okay. In a business, funds can come from various sources. Funds can come from owners, fund, Funds can come from owners, and on the other side, funds can come from outsiders. Outsiders. When money comes from owners, when the funds comes from the owners, it is equity. We call equity. When the fund comes from the owners, that is equity. And in the other case, when the funds come from outsiders, then when money comes from owners equity, when money comes from outsiders, it is liabilities. It is liabilities. I hope that you got it. See, funds can be come from both sides. The other side is from the owner side, and the second one is outsider side. So the fund comes from owner side is equity, and the funds comes from outsider side is liabilities. So we are sure about assets, equity, and liabilities now. Yes, we got the point about that. When it comes with an obligation to repay within the 1 year, that is short-term liabilities. What is short-term liabilities? You have a bank loan or you have a loan taken from others, so you have an obligation to repay sometime in the future, but the range, the duration must be within 1 year. So that is short-term liabilities. You have to repay within 1 year. Okay. So using this money, you will create same assets, basically short-term assets. When short-term assets are greater than short-term liabilities, that business will have comfortable liquidity position. Okay. When short-term asset is greater than short-term liabilities, a business will have a comfortable situation. Comfortable situation. Comfortable situation. In assets, you have, in case of assets, we have fixed assets, land, building, anything, machinery, and all. But assets cannot be assets can also be liability in some case. That see, you have a house. In your house, you live with your family, friends, and close relatives. So you do not let out to the tenants and you earn nothing from that house. That means your house is liabilities. It's not asset. So that also the main point. You should remember that. So I hope these things till now we are very clear now that. So let's advance. Now we are going to move to the fund utilization process. Here too, we get equity and liabilities and assets. Equity and liabilities under the headings of it. Short-term liabilities and assets under short-term of it. We got short-term assets and long-term liabilities and equity. What else is long-term assets? Okay. So To start with this, I said that funds can come from owners and let me write it. Funds can come from owners or outsiders. When the fund comes from outsiders with a commitment to pay within 1 year, that is short-term liability. This is short-term liability, okay? Let me write in short form short-term liability. Short-term, in case of short-term liabilities, I already explained in the earlier uh, topic that short-term liabilities how it is created. So a fund comes from the outsiders with a commitment to repay within 1 year. A paying period must be within 1 year, and there must be an obligation or promise to repay. That is short-term liabilities. And short-term assets. Short-term assets is funded by long-term funds. Okay, it is funded by long-term funds. Long-term funds. So short-term liability, short-term assets. Short-term assets is funded by long-term funds, and the remaining of it, long-term funds are utilized in creating long-term assets. You get long-term assets, short-term assets. This one, long-term assets. From this portal, the remaining of it is creating long-term assets. So I hope that everything is clear now that assets may be fixed assets, current assets, and fixed assets are land, building, machinery, and you may take loan from bank. Then you have an obligation to repay maybe within a year or maybe within 3-5 years and whatever. Then, but that doesn't make sense anyway. So you bought machinery by taking loan. So machinery is your asset which generate another revenue asset. So equity and liability is what you want to pay and what you need to pay and which you already consume. And short-term liabilities and short-term assets, you have already cleared that. It must be repaid within 1 year and there must be an obligation to do that, and short-term assets is created by long-term assets and short-term liabilities and equity too. Okay, let's advance here. Now we are moving to current ratio. Liabilities come here, assets come here, current liabilities here, current assets is here. Right. This is in field for Goldman Sachs parameters of the ratios analysis. Okay. In case of current ratio, we have liabilities and assets and current liabilities and current assets. The first thing we have to remember is that here funds can be obtained from owners or outsiders. That we must remember, we must keep in your mind. always. So how do we calculate current ratio? How to calculate current ratio? How to calculate current ratio? Current ratio is calculated as current ratio is equal to current asset divided by current liability. What is current asset? What is this current asset? Current asset is that all assets which can be converted into cash, or cash equivalent, and within a period of 1 year is current asset. And what is current liability? All liabilities which have to be settled within the period of a year. See, all liabilities needs to be settled down, but within the range of 1 year is current liabilities. And we needless to say these liabilities, what is liabilities and what is asset. That we have gone through and explained clearly about this. So this all, let's advance here. Analysis of three scenarios. Scenario one, current assets, current liability, net working capital, and current ratio. ML means million. 200 ml means million. So after studying and watching this course, if you are really adapted to and concentrating now, then you catch up with those things, then you can analyze current ratio and the fields of scenario, and what is net working capital, what is current liability, what is current assets, and how to calculate current ratio. And the ratio exactly is what it means, what it expresses in the form of ratio, right? Okay. Now we move on to the analysis of three scenarios. The first scenario is we divided into number one, number two, number three. We divided into number one, two, three, and in the current stage, 200 million, 200 million, 300 million. In the current liability, 100 million, 200 million, 400 million, and 10 million. Okay, so let's try to assume that. So from this, what we can infer is this business has an obligation of 100 million. In the first word, 100 million. This is an obligation promised to pay in future liabilities, okay? To be settled within a period of 1 year, and for that they have corresponding resource current asset of 200. This is current asset. they are having comfort of remaining 100. Out of 200 minus 100 means 100. So it's a comfortable situation. 100 million, that's called net working capital. This 100 million is called net working capital. Net working capital, to calculate net working capital, what you have? Current asset minus current liability is equal to net working capital. Okay. And net working capital is also called, this net working capital is also known as long term funds. Okay. L for long, T for term, F for funds, long term funds, net working capital. How to derive the net working capital? Net working capital equal to current asset minus current liability, and net working capital is also known as long-term funds, right? So the first ratio here, what is the first ratio? Current asset minus current liability, 100, net working capital, yeah, 100, and then current ratio. Now we are going to calculate current ratio. Current ratio is equal to current asset divided by current liability. In this case, 200 divided by 100, 2 is 1. 2 is 1. So in this case, 1 is what 1 implies. It is for every 1 rupee obligation, there are resources of 2 rupees. This is resources. There are resources for 2 rupees, and this is an obligation. It is for every 1 rupee obligation, there are resources of 2 rupees. Then the liquidity position is, let's say, it's good. Okay. So let's move on to next. In the second scenario, if we calculate current ratio, that means current asset divided by current liability, 200 by 200, 200 by 200, that means 1 is to 1. So to make it more clear that 1 is 1, it is for every 1 rupee obligation, there are resources of 1 rupee. So there is still some issues there, not that much good. And the third one, 300 divided by 400, so minus negative here. We found out negative. Maybe 0.67 is to 1. We found out negative, and in this situation, liquidity position is in serious trouble. In this case. So we learn a lot that we know everything about how to calculate current ratio and how to calculate net working capital. Net working capital is current asset minus current liability, and current ratio is current asset divided by current liability, and how they enforce that. Take a look, some example here. I borrowed 400 million. I borrowed 400 million with promise to pay. Here there is an obligation with promise to repay 1 year. Duration is 1 year. But what I've created, borrowed money is only 300 million. So what's happening to the remaining 100, which I borrowed? I borrowed 400 short-term money I'm supposed to use for short-term purpose, but instead I have used the remaining elsewhere, obviously for long-term purpose, because current asset is current asset is STP, short-term principal. In current asset, I could sell only 300. What happened to the remaining 100? Obviously for long-term purpose because current asset is short-term purpose. Okay. In this case, current asset is short-term purpose. If I calculate current ratio, that means on this example, if I calculate current ratio, that means 1 is to 1. No. Minus here. You have to put the remaining 100. Okay. So net working capital being negative here. What we are talking about is this scenario tree. Okay. So in this case, the working capital is negative, and this net working capital is known as long-term funding too. So it is in this case the ratio is unfavorable and serious trouble. Okay, that's all for today. And thank you guys for sacrificing your valuable time, watching my content, watching my pitch, and learn along with that and concentrate on the topic. Thanks a lot for all you have done to me. Thank you and see you next time.